Okay, here my request is a little video on using state diagrams in Papyrus. The reason some of you may have had trouble today, whereas you might remember not having had trouble in the version of Papyrus we offered you earlier, is this reopened bug which existed in an earlier version of Papyrus and has apparently reappeared in version 2.0.1, which we just gave you today. And the essence of it is this description: the syntax trigger guard effect is not displayed on the transition, and that's what some of you experienced. So let me show you a workaround. Here we are in Papyrus. Let's create ourselves a new state machine diagram. Now, somebody also asked, why do we start off with this initial state machine 1 as opposed to with a blank canvas like we do for the class diagram? Now, the reason for that is easier to explain if you look at the abstract syntax for the state machine in the UML spec. It's page 346 of the PDF document. You see, a state machine contains one ... regions. Okay, so there always has to be at least one region. So these are like regions of parallel behavior in the state machine. Because there always must be at least one, Papyrus gives you one to start with. This is an example of the way Papyrus is driven very directly by an electronic representation of the UML meta model. Okay, so let's build ourselves a diagram. We've got an initial state. It doesn't usually have a name, so we won't give it one. We have a state, which I'll call decrypted. We have another state, which I'll call encrypted. I'm basing this loosely around one of the exercises from the lab, but I'll probably forget the operation names and what have you. Now let's put in some transitions. We can put in a transition from the initial state to decrypted, which is where any memo is supposed to stay. Now this is a window that supposedly allows me to enter the whole syntax of the transition with syntax complete and what have you there. It doesn't actually work terribly well, so I'm just going to dismiss it. The initial state, we don't actually need any label on there at all, because this is just saying when the object is created, what state does it land in? It lands in the state decrypted. Now let's have a transition from decrypted to encrypted. And again, I'll dismiss that box. It wouldn't help, nothing would appear if I did put stuff in it. Now what are we going to, let's put the other one back actually, and then we'll worry about what we're going to put on the transition back the other way. Now what we would like is on this transition, we would like to have separately the trigger, the guard, and the effect or the action. Now in fact nothing will show up on this transition in Papyrus 2.0.1 other than what we put on as the name. So what we're going to put on is all the information we want in the name. So we're going to say the event is encrypt if we receive the event encrypt, and it's actually the case that now there was a method is encrypted, wasn't there? So what we actually want is not is encrypted. If that guard holds true, then we will take this transition. And that, you see, will appear perfectly nicely on that transition. And we can move it just like that. And we can do the similar thing for the other. Now, in the other case, though, I'll show you what we should be able to do. We should not be terribly interested in the name of a transition as such, because the interesting fact about a transition is supposed to be the trigger and the guard and the effect. So we should be able to say add the trigger, and you might expect that to be decrypt. And you see that doesn't appear. And then we would expect to be able to add a guard. Adding a guard is a little bit interesting when it works. We could add a constraint, and the interesting thing is the specification, because we get to express the language. Suppose we choose an opaque expression. We get to choose our language. I can say my constraint is expressed in natural language, and the natural language that I'm going to express it in is English. So if you like, this is a formalised way of saying we have an informal guard on a transition, which is quite an interesting thing to be able to say. So I can say, for example, is encrypted. And this lets me express a guard inside square brackets, but in a completely informal language, in English, like that. And that's very nice, and it gets recorded in the model, and you can see it when you click down here, but unfortunately in Papyrus 2.0.1 it doesn't actually show up on the diagram, so it's not much use. So what I recommend to you for now, and in particular what I recommend to you for the assessment next week, is to do what we did on that transition, namely put all the information you want to show on your state diagram transitions in the labels. So here we have the event encrypt, which causes the transition, which triggers the transition. And we have here the guard, not is encrypted, shown in square brackets. That's the thing that also has to be true in order for the transition to be taken after it's triggered by the event. If we were talking about a behavioural state diagram and we also wanted to show an action that could be undertaken when the transition was carried out, we would put a slash there and then a text after there to show what the action was. As I think I said in a lecture, that's relatively rare. Okay, I hope that makes sense.